Yeah, okay. My name is Neill, and I was born and raised in Scotland. And at the fine age of 18, I met a brother of my father's who was in the Canadian Army during the Second World War. And he was stationed in England. And his name was Neill. So anyway, he came up to visit us on one of his leaves one time, and he dropped the bug in, "You've got to get to Canada. You guys are wasting your time here. Canada, if you want to work, there's work, and if you want to do it, you'll be very rich." So anyway, I had an elder brother, George, who was a lab technician at the Elgin General Hospital. And George was the first to come over to Canada. 6 months later, Sister Annie came over, and she got to be the head cook at the Elgin General. And then I was next in line. And they met me up in Toronto, and we got the train down to London, then over to St. Thomas. And they had an apartment by this time. They were living together. And we lived in 40 Chestnut Street. Never forget that number. And I was always involved in sports, even back in the old country. I played a lot of soccer. Football, as it was known to me then, but it's known now as soccer. I played for quite a bit, and played for my local works team. I played for my high school team. And I had done quite well. And of course, I don't know how the news got around, but as soon as about 2 days after I landed here, the phone rang. Would like to talk to Neill. And this was an introduction into the St. Thomas Soccer Club. So anyway, I started in there and doing that and playing. And during the soccer days, I got quite friendly with Mr. Tommy White. And Tommy was the greatest guy that ever lived. And he had a sports shop on Talbot Street in St. Thomas, and that's where I used to buy my equipment that I needed. And Tommy got me thinking. He said, "I would love to have you as a trainer." He said, "I think you could do it. You've been involved in sports all your life." And he said, I'd help you out all the way. I said, "Okay, what's the first thing we got to do?" He said, "The first thing you got to do is take a course with St. John's Ambulance." I said, "Okay, and then what do we do?" Then he says, "You get with a team like either baseball or hockey, and those associations, they hold clinics every year with maybe a dozen guys who are aspiring to be trainers. So you spend a whole week up, maybe it was Windsor for baseball and Kitchener for hockey." Well, anyway, I attended both camps as it was, and I got my papers, and I was ready to go. And the first team I was with Tommy White's St. Thomas Elgins. I spent 3 years with them, and Keith Cooley from the St. Thomas, who was great, well known in hockey. Keith came along, and he needed a trainer, and this was with the senior team, the St. Thomas Royals. So I was a trainer for the Royals for the 4 or 5 years that they were in St. Thomas. And then Keith got involved with the group. They had asked him, because they were trying to get a junior franchise, which was like trying to get $1 million out of somebody. But anyway, they were trying hard to get a franchise for St. Thomas. And they thought that Keith would be the man. He was well known in hockey circles. It was his family who held training camps throughout Canada to send players over to Britain, England and Scotland to play hockey. And at one time we had, the British hockey was great at that time. And it was great for quite a few years. But like everything else, it takes its turn. And hockey began to drop a little. And they finally abolished, they stopped playing hockey over in Britain, I think it was 1956, somewhere around there. And we had all the guys, there were 7 or 8 of them that had come from Britain. They came to St. Thomas to play for the Royals, and they found work here, there, and everywhere. And they formed the nucleus of the St. Thomas Royal Senior Club. And then, as I said before, the junior franchise took over. So Keith instantly got on the phone to me and said, "We'll be needing a trainer. Are you interested?" I said, "Sure, I'll be interested." I said, "Just give me a couple of days to think about it and get the okay from the boss." So I talked it over with my wife and family, and yes, sure, go ahead, do it. You want to do it, so go right ahead. So I called Keith up and said, yeah, I was ready whenever he was ready. So this was 1960. In 61, they finally got the franchise to open up in 1961. So the first thing that came up, of course, was training camp. This is where you have kids come in from all over the country, as it were. We may have had, that first few years, maybe 35, 40 kids in to try out for the team. And as it grew and grew, I can remember we had over 100 kids come in. And the 10 days of training camp, I virtually lived in the arena. When you had that many kids, all the sweaters, 120 sweaters, they had to be cleaned and washed every night, or every time they were used. So I would spend the whole night in the arena washing. And I would see my wife during the day, because when I finished the wash, then I would go home and see the family again. But those first few years were pretty tough. But Keith seemed to be a great scout, and he had great scouts out in outlying areas, as far up as Sudbury. He had kids come down from Sudbury. We even had a kid from the States one year, Billy Christadol. He was a great kid, great kid. But anyway, things progressed. And the players that we got from the St. Thomas mine, you always needed 3 or 4 or half a dozen, if you could get them, home brews, because you only had so many import cards. And of course you needed the home brews. And that first year I think we had 3, Billy Marshall, Tom Ewens, and Bobby Brown. And they were with us for a few years. And then, as far as the Barons went, as we all know, and as we did do in the last session we had, the Barons demised after a series with Flin Flon that is still talked about in hockey circles. When we finally got to the hotel in Flin Flon, we had to have police protection from the hotel to the arena, and from the arena backward to the hotel. The types of people that they had up there, they didn't want to see good hockey, they didn't want to see good goals, they wanted to see fights. Fight. They were all miners, you see, out in the mines, and they were tough, But anyway, that's all they wanted to see. If they could see 3 fights in a night, they were happy. But anyway, it got so bad that Keith pulled the team off in the second game in Flin Flon. The first 2 games were played in St. Thomas, and we were 1-1. We won 1, they won 1. And then we went up to Flin Flon, and they won the first game handily, and they were doing the same in the second game. And Keith pulled the team off the ice, and they had a vote, and everybody voted, let's go home. Knowing the consequences of what it might be, Keith and Jack Cassidy, who was the manager, they were both suspended by the OHA. I think it was 1 or 2 years they got. But anyway, that ended the Burns. They were done. But, you know, they had some good hockey players. They didn't have to be like this. The number one guy they had was Bobby Clark, who starred for the Philadelphia Flyers. They had Reggie Leach, who starred for the Flyers. What did they call him, the Rifleman or something? Yeah, they had a great name for him. But they had half a dozen players that were drafted and played in the NHL. So they didn't have to resort to the tactics that they did. I can remember the first game up there, they were all on the ice when we went out for a pre-game skate, and all their players had a puck, and as we stepped through the door, somebody would fire a puck at the kid coming through the door. It got so, we had one kid, a good hockey player too, but he'd been knocked to the ice, and this guy actually took a kick at him, and his skates stuck in the boards. He used such force. Well, I took that kid off, and he says, I don't want to go back on there. I want to get into the dressing room. So I took him in, and the poor kid was crying his eyes out when he got into the dressing room. That's how bad it was. Unfortunately. Well, we had a core group of maybe 400-500, and they traveled with us. They were, I'm trying to find a good word. No, I can't come up. But anyway, they were great fans, and they went all the way with us. We had a few incidents in St. Thomas, referees getting punched by these great fans. But no, they were real good. They were real good fans, and I can remember days when we would be playing London or St. Mary's Lincoln's. We would pack that arena, and to the point that even the police had to come out and close the doors. The manager at that time was Harry McLeod, and Harry would just take the people, he wouldn't stop taking them in. And we had, there's pictures in the arena right now of people, and they're 8 and 9 deep, standing on the top rail during these games with London and St. Mary's. We had a great team too that we played against, the Tillsonburg Titans, but they only lasted a couple of years. They didn't have very good facilities, and the town went through a change, and that they were going to build a new arena, which they did later on, and it's a beautiful facility. But they didn't last a long bit. We loved playing Chatham, because they were the kingpins of the Kent County section. There'd be Windsor and Chatham and 8 teams around that area. And I always remember that one of the guys playing for Chatham Maroons was Fergie Jenkins. So and I happened to meet Fergie at the Y a few years later, and we sat there half the day talking about hockey. He enjoyed playing hockey when he was a junior. And here he was, a Major League Baseball pitcher, talking about junior hockey. Before we forget the Burns, but anyway, talking about the scouting staff, we got a lot of help from the Montreal Canadiens and Scotty Bowman in particular. Scotty sent us 6 kids down the first year, and they were schooled in junior hockey. They'd played junior hockey for a few years up in Peterborough, and Scotty brought them down. We had Gary Watts, Rick Eckert, John Hall, Ken McKay, Wally Chase, and Hugh McGonigal. That was the 6 kids we had, and they were invaluable. They seemed to settle everybody else down, and they were the stars of the team, no doubt. And Scotty, for the first, I think it was 4 or 5 years, they were affiliated with the Montreal Canadiens. And Scotty was there behind us every year of those 5 years. And then we kind of changed, we got tied up with a gentleman a scout from London, John Ryan. John Ryan was a scout for the Boston Bruins, and that's why we had the Boston Bruins type shirts. John helped us out a lot, much the same as Scotty Bowman did. And Keith, he had contacts all over the place. He could get, it was amazing, really. So then they left a great void in the city as far as hockey went. So they still had the junior franchise, but it was owned by the minor hockey. So the group took over, and this started a change of names over the years. They went from the Barons to the Elgins, and the Elgins to the St. Thomas Colonels. And then the Colonels went to the St. Thomas Pests, because Bill Topping and Pest Control Service was the sponsors. And that lasted for, about 7 years, I think it was. 1984, we got a new sponsor, Tony Millis, a St. Thomas businessman. He sponsored the team, new name, new coaching staff, new everything. And the name they come out with was the St. Thomas Stars, which they still use today. And that was 1984 when it first unearthed. So anyway, the Stars, they went along very well over the years, 1984, and then 1987 was the banner year for hockey in St. Thomas. 4 players, Tim Horvat, Robbie Coots, Dennis Hebert, and there was another kid, a goaltender, went to and Coach Skip Cummings, and I was named as the trainer. So we went to Sydney, Nova Scotia for the Canada Winter Games. And they shut down hockey in the Western Junior B League, which we were in then. They shut it down while the games was on, because pretty near every team in the league had somebody at the games playing. So when we got back, we started to play. We'd played the first round before we left and won it. We started in the second round and won it. And all of a sudden we were in the finals. And we played Chatham Maroons in the final. And we beat them 4-0. And we won the Sutherland Cup. That was the cup that was presented for supremacy in the Western Junior B League. So that was the best year that they had in many years. And even today, they're still using the name of the St. Thomas Stars. I spent 28 years between senior and junior hockey. And when I retired after the 1987 season, I got a call from a good friend of mine, Ted Kidder, down in Aylmer. And Ted, what are you doing? And we used to talk, and it wasn't like that. We used to talk back and forth. We knew each other through hockey again. So Ted says, come on down, I want to talk to you. So I went down to Aylmer, and he says, I need a manager bad. I said, Ted, I've never been a manager. He says, you can go to any player that, and he says, Barry Powers down in Dorchester, he always said that you were the best hockey assigner in the country. He said, you could pick out a kid knowing he was going to be a hockey player. He says, you'll be a good manager. He says, I need you. I said, well, let me talk to Donna about it. She's enjoying this, being retired from it. So I talked to my wife, and she said, sure, go ahead. So I was a manager for 3 years, and during those 3 years, we won the All-Ontario Senior Championship in my second year. And I was named twice as the manager of the year in the senior hockey, which is, you know, it's not something, but makes you feel good.